Good morning, Shadydale Church of God. We are going to share our Sunday school lesson today. This is week 7, October 16, 2022. Our subject today is the call of Gideon. What is our study going to be about today? We sometimes feel inadequate to do what God has called us to do. Gideon received divine reassurance of God's continued presence for the task at hand. Our Bible passage that we'll be studying from is Judges 6, verses 1 and 2, and also verses 7 through 16a. The topics that will be discussed is God's call, God's provision, and leadership. A little bit about our Bible background, okay? The cycle of events recorded in the book of Judges played out like clockwork. The Israelites would do evil. God will allow them to be oppressed by their enemies. The people would humble themselves and cry out for help. The Lord would send a deliverer. This time it was the Midianites who did the oppressing, and it was Gideon, the son of Joash, whom God called to save Israel. Gideon did not think of himself as a warrior, but the messenger God sent told him to go in the strength he had. God's call and presence, along with Gideon's willing obedience and the gifts he already had, would bring the victory. So if we just kind of reflect on this Bible background a little bit, oftentimes God might give us a task to do or a job to do, and we can feel inadequate. We can feel like, man, I can't do that. And it may be something as simple as working with some of our family members or coworkers or neighbors or friends or whatever, and they may have, it may be somebody that has a gambling problem. They gamble and then they stop and they gamble and they stop. And oftentimes we think, well, ain't no sense for me helping them. They're just going to keep doing the same thing over again. It can, a lot of us have dealt with alcoholism in our families and drug addiction and those type of things. And God may send us to or encourage us to share a word or try to witness or give us a task to do, and we just feel inadequate. We feel the urging of God, but then all of a sudden we'd be like, man, I can't do that. If I do that, then he or she's going to do this. Well, that's not for us to decide. When God gives us a task to do, our job is to do the task, not to worry about the results. Too often we're concerned about the results and how things are going to play out. And that's not what our job is. That's not what our assignment is. Our assignment is to follow the Lord and what he has given us. Okay. So we're going to move on now. We're going to start reading in Judges 6, verses 1 and 2. Okay.
Judges 6. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds.
Okay. So when Moses was leading the Israelites from slavery in Egypt to the promised land, they experienced periods of rebellion. Joshua succeeded Moses as a leader, but after he died, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and worshiped various gods of the people around them. Judges 2:10 through 12. This evil was a direct rejection of the Lord and a violation of the first 2 commandments. God never abandoned his people, but when they rebelled like this, he would allow their enemies to oppose them. Here it was the Midianites who did the oppressing, to oppress them. Okay. Life became so miserable for the Israelites that they hid in caves in the mountains. The Midianites would have taken what they wanted: animals, crops, foods, and even women and children. Okay. So one thing that's important here when we read this, it says God did not abandon the children of Israel. Why is that important? Because God will not abandon us. He will not abandon me. He will not abandon you. So he will not abandon those that he sends us to talk to, whether it's family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, or whatever. God loves us and he wants the very best for us. And he's not going to give up on us, but too often we give up on him. So God will not abandon us, but he will allow stuff to happen. And when he allows stuff to happen, sometimes it's like, God, where are you? Have you abandoned me, man? What happened? Right? But the word tells us that God did not abandon Israel and he will not abandon us as well. Okay. So now let's go to uh, verses 7 through 11.
When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites."
Okay. God heard the Israelites when they cried out to him because of what the people of Midian were doing to them. The response of the prophet spelled out the problem. God was going to address the root issue before bringing deliverance. God's prophet reminded the Israelites of how the Lord had rescued them from slavery in Egypt, drove other nations out to give the Israelites the promised land. The Lord was clear that his people should not worship the gods of foreign nations, but they didn't listen. This was why he allowed the Midianites to trouble them. God now acted to free the people from their oppression. Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress, a pit not designed or intended for threshing wheat. The process of loosening the elbow, I don't know what that word is, part of the grain from the shaft. He was conducting this process in the wine press in an attempt to keep it out of the sight of the Midianites. If they spotted Gideon, they would raid his field and steal his entire crop. He was quietly gathering armsful of wheat at a time and threshing them out of sight, a laborious, slow, and frustrating process. Okay, so like I said, God will not abandon us. He will allow us a way of escape when we think there is no way, when we think we're in a jam and hemmed up and can't do any better. God will show us how to do better and he will protect us. Okay. And so, but what we must do is listen when God's messenger comes to us. When Gideon brings the word, you have to listen. God sometimes sends us an angel. Sometimes it just seems like a voice, a quiet, still voice that we hear and we know that's the voice of God. Sometimes it may be through our children, our loved ones, our spouses, the pastor, preach word, the Sunday school lesson. It can come in a lot of different ways, but whichever way it comes, make sure we hear first, we hear the word, we internalize it, we think about it, then we have it in our heart, and then we act on it. Okay. And once we do that, then God will do what he has promised he will do because he has no choice. He's God. And he cannot not do what he says. Okay. Now, Okay. Verse 12.
When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied. "But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you
All right. The angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon in the Old Testament times, and an appearance of the angel of the Lord was considered to be a manifestation of the Lord himself. In stories such as this one, the terms angel of the Lord and the Lord are used interchangeably. The angel called Gideon a mighty warrior, one who was brave and capable. He also assured Gideon of God's presence, not just at that moment, but on an ongoing basis. Gideon did not seem encouraged by the greeting. He replied dejectedly as a representative of all Israelites, "If the Lord is with us, why has he allowed this to happen to us?" In essence, he asked how it could be true that God was with them when so much was wrong. When where was the evidence of God's powerful hand, of his enemy defeating miracles? It seemed the Lord had abandoned the Israelites to the oppression of the people of Midian. In other words, God was not with us. Otherwise, he would be helping us here. But God was, in fact, at work, and Gideon would be a key part of the plan. The Lord seemed to ignore Gideon's protests, instead giving him his charge: "Go in the strength you have to save Israel out of the Midianites' hands." God was referring to the strength Gideon already possessed through the Lord. Gideon's ability to save Israel was not in his valor or fighting ability. It resided in his belief that God could do the miraculous. Gideon just needed to put that faith to work. Gideon expressed doubt in his ability to help save Israelites, assessing his clan as the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh and himself as the least in his family. God responded by clarifying why Gideon would be successful. "I will be with you." This is such a powerful lesson right here. Um, at a time when they were suffering, at a time when things were still going bad, at a time when um, seemed like nothing was going right. Okay, the Midianites were still after them, oppressing them. They were still hiding. They were still scared, and yet God says, "Go." God says, "I got you." God says, "I want you to go get my people and deliver them out of their hands." And Gideon's like, excuse me? Who, me? Are you, you know, so often we look at ourselves. Now, just like Gideon, we believe God can do all things. We believe that. There's no doubt in our mind that God can do all things. But yet, when we put ourselves in God's hands, when God calls us, we think, God, I can't do that. God, I'm not adequate for that. God, I'm not cut. That's not who I am. Uh, really? So what we need to sit back and understand is God knows who we are. God created us. He knows the hairs on our head, or some people might say the hairs we don't have on our head. Amen. But at the same time, Gideon, all he had to do was believe in God, and that's what the angel told him at the end. God is going to be with you. Well, how can I do it? God is going to be with you. How can you do it? God is going to be with you. So as we close out this Sunday school lesson, whenever the task comes, and then understand this too, God was preparing Gideon, and Gideon didn't even know it. Okay, so sometimes our insufficiencies are being built up by God as we're going through our crisis. And so I'm gonna tell you this little, I guess it's kind of a funny story. I'll say it like that. God told this man there was a great big boulder blocking the middle of the road. And God told this man, he said, look, I want you to go push that boulder. Guy says, okay, that's what you want me to do? I'll do it. So he starts pushing, and he's pushing. First, he's just kind of pushing it with his hands, and he can't move it. Then he puts his shoulder into it. He can't move it. He puts his other shoulder into it. Then he leans back, and he goes and goes and goes. About 8 hours later, he cries out, God, I can't move this boat. I'm so upset. Why would you have me to do this? Da, da, da. And he's just complaining and screaming and hollering at God and says, I can't move this. God comes back and said, I never told you to move it. I just needed you to push it so you can have the strength for the task that I had for you. So oftentimes, God is just preparing us, and we have to allow him. So God has made a way for each and every one of us. So go and let God be with you. Thank you for your time. God bless you, and have a wonderful day. And guess what? I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. On next Sunday, our Sunday school superintendent, Reverend Nehemiah Newman, will be bringing you your Sunday school lesson. Please join in. Thank you.